Buenos días. Nos vamos sentando, por favor. Gracias. Gracias. Bueno, muchas gracias. Empiezas tú si quieres.
¿Empiezo yo?
Sí.
Sí. ¿Se me oye? ¿Se me oye bien? Muy bien, pues nada, buenos días a todos, bienvenidos a este evento, a este evento formativo que hemos organizado con mucho cariño, mucha ilusión, con el equipo de Allianz Bernstein, encabezados por Miguel y por Cristina. Y en primer lugar, gracias, thank you so much, Ken, for your presence here. Y bueno, pues simplemente daros la bienvenida, recordaros que nosotros lo valoramos y lo vemos como un evento mucho más allá de la formación. Es un evento donde lo que buscamos entre todos es seguir reforzando todas nuestras habilidades, tanto de conocimientos como las habilidades, las soft skills que tenemos que tener ante los clientes con los que os enfrentáis todos los días. Estamos en un momento muy cambiante donde los clientes cada vez nos exigen más, nos exigen algo mucho mejor y creemos que con lo que nos ha preparado Allianz Bernstein, que es un regalo, realmente es un regalo, lo que vamos a tener a lo largo del día de hoy, nos puede aportar mucho. Así que os pido pues, que lo aprovechéis al máximo, todo esto que vamos a desarrollar a lo largo del día y que no queda en el día de hoy. Esto es un paso más dentro de todo el programa formativo y dentro de todas las soluciones de ahorro e inversión que ofrecemos. En este caso, toda la parte formativa encabezada por el equipo de Personas y Cultura, que tenemos aquí a un compañero que lo está representando y que va a continuar con todo este proceso formativo y, sobre todo, pues insisto, que aprovechemos mucho, que disfrutemos mucho de este evento porque hoy hemos venido a disfrutarlo y bueno, que simplemente con ver el ambiente que hay a primera hora creo que tenemos los ingredientes perfectos para aprovecharlo. Así que muchas gracias y nada, doy paso a Miguel, que realmente Allianz Bernstein es el protagonista de hoy, bueno, pues con todo lo que ha preparado para nosotros. Gracias.
Gracias. Bueno, gracias, Daniel. Un placer a todos. Me llamo Miguel Luzárraga, soy el director general para Iberia de Allianz Bernstein. Es un placer teneros a todos aquí. Esto es una maravilla. Nos reunidos todos, viéndonos las caras. Esto es vuestro evento. Es para vosotros. Hemos trabajado mucho, todo el equipo de AB, como nos hacemos llamar de una manera más sencilla, para que no haya trabalenguas. Pues todo el equipo de AB nos hemos esforzado mucho por vosotros, porque llevamos muchos años bueno, pues, que habéis confiado en nosotros y para nosotros esto es el mejor de los regalos, el mejor premio. Así que lo primero de todo, gracias. ¿Quién es Allianz Bernstein? Bueno, Allianz Bernstein es una sociedad gestora americana con presencia global, con más de 790.000 millones de dólares bajo gestión. Es una gestora que está presente en más de 55 países, más de 55 años de historia. Es una gestora increíblemente inteligente a la hora de acercarse al cliente, porque en ese sentido, bueno, pues hemos aprendido de nuestros clientes, de lo que a veces nos solicitáis y nos pedís para llegar a vuestros clientes y ofreceros las mejores soluciones. Para mí lo más importante, yo llevo en este mundo pues, más de 25 años, para mí lo más importante son las personas, porque creo que, sobre todo en nuestra sociedad, el contacto es bueno. Precisamente por eso llevamos mucho tiempo trabajando en esta formación para vosotros. Y me voy a saltar el protocolo directamente y pongo a las personas. Aquí está el equipo que va a estar con vosotros hoy. Por un lado tenemos a Ken Heyman, que bueno, ahora voy a hacer la introducción formal de Ken, pero luego tenéis al equipo de AB con vosotros aquí, que es quien importa para que nos pongáis caras. Y aquí quito títulos y cosas. Aquí no solamente estoy yo, también está Cristina, ahí al fondo. Hola, Cristina. Esa es Cristina, la directora de marketing. Patricia, que también está aquí en el equipo de España. A Kim, que aunque está en París, habla un español con un acento francés precioso. Así que, bueno, aquí estamos a vuestra disposición y vamos a hacer esta jornada de hoy pues que salga lo mejor de nosotros. Por lo tanto, eso es quién es Alliance Vesting ahora mismo. En España gestionamos en torno a los 3.000 millones. Venimos de haber lanzado la firma hace 6 años. Hace 6 años no había prácticamente nada y ahora mismo pues, tenemos la suerte de poder contar con la confianza de muchos inversores, con mucha penetración de mercado y estamos dando el do de pecho. Bueno, ¿por qué estáis aquí? Bueno, yo creo que eso es importante. Yo creo que el día de hoy hay que tener en cuenta qué hacemos aquí. Y para ello, bueno, pues hemos preparado pues, una agenda que parece que hay muchas cosas, pero no os preocupéis que os vamos a ir ayudando en eso. Vais a tener que estar atentos, porque en el día de hoy vamos a tener que hablar de muchas cosas que esperemos que sean útiles. Lo importante es que sean útiles para vosotros. Hablaremos primero con una primera formación muy interesante, de la mano de Ken. Luego vamos a hacer un pequeño cóctel, comida ahí fuera. La verdad es que es una maravilla este hotel con esta terraza aquí fuera, el tiempo que nos ha acompañado hoy para poder hacerlo. Y luego por la tarde vamos a hacer otra formación diferente. Es una especie de juego que se llama el juego de la inversión en renta fija. Y eso os va a ayudar a conocer un poco más cómo funciona, poneros en la mente de un gestor. Por lo tanto, yo creo que eso es importante. Y por último, mi tercera y última pregunta. Bueno, ¿por qué estáis aquí vosotros? Porque sois los mejores. Sois los mejores consejeros exclusive de AXA. Por lo tanto, mira, yo la verdad es que estas cosas me encantan. Yo os voy a dar un aplauso, así que venga, un aplauso para todos vosotros porque sois los mejores. Así que bueno, sin más dilación, voy a dar paso a unas pequeñas notas que también son importantes. La siguiente presentación, la primera parte de la formación, es la parte de Ken Heyman, es en inglés, ¿vale? Os hemos dado traducción simultánea. Quien no tenga esos aparatillos para poneros en las orejas con la traducción simultánea, hay más fuera, nos lo podemos decir a Cristina, quien no tenga y necesite, que levante la mano y se os trae 1, 2, 3, adjudicado, solo 3. Pues 3 más. Si en algún momento durante la presentación necesitáis alguno más o alguno no os funciona, tranquilos y tranquilas que se os traen. Luego os hemos traído unas bolsas con una serie de informaciones que luego, si queréis, vamos comentando con unos regalos y unas cosas interesantes que también podáis ver un poco más adelante. Bueno, entonces vamos a la primera parte de la formación, en donde tenemos esta parte de aquí, en donde, bueno, Ken Heyman entró en Alliance Vesting en el año 2005. ¿Y por qué entró en Alliance Vesting en el año 2005? Porque, bueno, empezó a formar a una parte muy importante de nuestra cantera, que es la cantera americana, en donde allí hay gente como vosotros, banqueros privados que se dedican a hablar con los clientes. Y para nosotros es importante la salud mental de nuestros consejeros, de nuestros agentes, de nuestros banqueros privados, de tal manera que tenemos la figura del formador para que la gente se sienta un poco más confortable, que la gente se sienta un poco más segura a la hora de poder hablar con sus clientes. Eso es para nosotros una de las cosas que nos diferencia del resto. Y claramente hemos querido, y de hecho sois los primeros en recibir este tipo de formación en España, que creo que, y esperamos que sea lo más útil posible para vosotros. De tal manera que Ken, bueno, viaja por todo Estados Unidos, está mucho tiempo hablando con los consejeros, con los banqueros privados de Alliance Vesting, les ayuda en sus conversaciones. Por lo tanto, esto es una semilla que puede brotar en vosotros como un inicio de una relación de muy largo plazo, para poder ayudaros. Por lo tanto, no os quedéis solamente con este momento aislado, quedaros con un poquito más adelante. Así que bueno, sin más dilación, Ken, I did a very different introduction about you. I don't follow scripts. I'm sorry. But anyway, the audience is yours. So this is for you.
Thank you.
And well,
Gracias. Thank you.
take care.
Buenos dias. And that's all I have. It is absolutely a pleasure to be with you. I will tell you, in the United States, where I spend most of my time, I do talks like this 4 or 5 times a day, 3 or 4 days a week. So I do a lot, in front of a lot of audiences. And I've done that for 30 years. So I'm also very old. I never get nervous in front of an audience, never. This morning, coming here, a little nervous. And let me tell you why. Because we are family, AllianceBernstein and AXA, and you are the best at what you do. It's appropriate for me to be concerned that I feed you well. Now, the good news is, even if I miss on that, we're going to feed you well after, so it will probably balance out. But I was nervous coming here, so I hope that what I have to say will be useful to you. Now, as Miguel said to me in English, and I'm not sure it was translated, he didn't follow the script on introducing me. So why don't I take a stab at that so you can use me properly for your purposes. My intention is to speak ideas to you, and I've designed these ideas and have built these over many years to be helpful to you, perhaps even beyond helpful, to give you more power to influence your clients. It is my belief, given your role in a human being's life, that if I can make you more influential, if I can teach you how to use language more powerfully to affect the neurology of the human, that human will do better. Now, all of you have been doing this for a while. There's no rookies in here who don't know what you're doing. You and I both know, and you know very much from experience. I know even more from the research, that human beings cannot make decisions over long periods of time successfully without help. So our role is incredibly important, and as the world becomes more complicated and human beings have more complicated financial lives, your role becomes even more important. So the more powerful I can help you become, the better you will be. In order to do that, you really have to understand my point of view, or from where I speak to you. So I am not a financial professional. I'm sure he made that clear. I am a psychologist. I'm not an academic psychologist. I was a practicing psychotherapist in the Washington, D.C. market for 20 years. And you look at me and you say, why would you go to Washington, D.C. to be a psychologist? And if you watch the news, you probably have a suspicion, ooh, there's a lot of business to be done in Washington, D.C. if you're a psychologist. And unfortunately, I wasn't able to help, so about 30 years ago, I decided to work with financial advisors, because you're a little crazy, but they're a lot crazy, so a little easier to work with you than with politicians, which I did. So my work is about financial advisors, and I've worked with financial advisors face-to-face every day since 1993. So I know a little bit about what you do. The other thing I have is knowledge of the behavioral sciences. So neurology, sociology, classical psychology, and behavioral economics, which is an emerging science. But one of the challenges of behavioral economics is the academics don't translate it into stuff you can use with clients. You can learn a lot about how clients think, but they don't typically give you strategies. So my job is to give you strategies. And this work today, I'm going to teach you a strategy about how to use language in a structure to talk to clients. And it was selected specifically because of the kind of work you do. You would work at a very high level with very complicated cases. And what we want to do is give you the same high level of knowledge about the use of language and how to affect human emotions as you have in your mastery of the arts of investing and the arts of risk management, things that you're proven experts at. So if we can bring that together, knowing that human beings who are becoming successful have more and more complicated lives and need more and more help with those lives, I think that's a move forward for you. So that's my intention. I translate insights from the behavioral sciences to the work of the client-facing financial advisors. I'm not academic. I'm all about how can I help you do what you do better. So with that in mind, what I want to teach you today is how to understand trust and urgency in human beings, and how to use, I should say, how to build trust intentionally, technically, scientifically with human beings. I'm going to go pretty deep into that, because that's going to give you a lot of guidance. It's going to give you how to do this. What do I need to do? How do I need to think about it? That person is not trusting me enough. How do I increase trust in that person? But trust is not the only thing you need. You also need to know how to activate urgency. Because until you can touch the emotions of the human, you're not as influential as you could be. And what I'm going to teach you, one thing, important thing I'm going to teach you is every client you're working with is doing this much, but every client you're working with needs this much. And moving them from here to here is what's going to be better for them, and moving them from here to here is what's going to be better for you, and moving them from here to here is what's going to be better for this organization. And so it's a win-win-win in the sense of what we're trying to accomplish here. So you understand I'm not, the fixed income is later, that's the fun part. This is the boring human stuff today, all right? What I'm doing right now is I'm testing how much of a sense of humor you have. And so far, not bad, all right? All right, thank you for laughing in the right place. Okay. So let's start with this question. You have a human being, probably more elegantly dressed than my human here, but the reason I use this illustration is to suggest to you that human beings have not changed neurologically in over 50,000 years. We have remains of humans that we've been able to study that were preserved for that length of time, and we know that they're virtually identical to human beings, though they tended to a rougher form of clothing, and their hairdos weren't quite as refined. But the point is, the way they operated is identical to the way we operate today. And the way that person had to operate in that setting was very much having to deal with survival, very much having to deal with making decisions that would be successful in a survival orientation. And so the way this instrument called the brain evolved required the brain to be able to do two things. Unfortunately, it's not able to do two things at the same time, but it has to do two things. Thing one is it has to perceive the environment, make sense of the environment, and make a decision about what the right thing to do is. And so we evolved this thing called the neocortex, and I have mine here prominently displayed. So think of me as your cartoon neurological diagram. I wonder how she's going to translate that. So my neocortex is right here, new, brain. It's the youngest part of the brain. It controls what? Mathematics, logic, language, deliberation, future orientation planning. It's a very slow operating machine, and it gets easily overwhelmed. In other programs, I teach about how to help clients who become overwhelmed and are operating at a more emotional level, how we manage conversations with distressed clients. But today we're going to talk primarily about working with clients in a creative moment of suggestion. So this part of the brain operates very slowly, very deliberately. In fact, in the research, it's often called the slow brain. There's a second part of the brain down at the base of the skull here, the cerebellum, the brain stem. And this is the old brain. Sometimes we call it the reptilian brain. It's not terribly accurate, but it looks very much like the brains of crocodilians, alligators, crocodiles, caimans. Very primitive, and it's all about movement. It's all about action. It's all about survival. This part of the brain has no command of language, but it has command of motivation. And that's a problem for financial professionals. I want you to let that settle in for a minute. It has no command of language. Words don't work. But it's the source of what causes people to take action. So you, in your communications, you have to be able to take language, use language that this part of the brain can understand, drive that language to that human being, as I'm doing with you right now. While doing that, you also have to intentionally cause that language to activate motion so this person will take action. Because without the motion, without the emotions attached to it, but without the desire attached to it, they won't move. And you will come in and say, we need to do this. And they will look at you and they say, you have all heard this. Let me think about that. Those are the words you never want to hear, right? You've made a proposal, here's an investment, or here's a solution in risk management. Absolutely appropriate for the client. And a lot of times your clients, you'll go in and the client's utterly oriented to you trustingly, and they've delegated the decision to you, and you come in and you say, you're at this stage of life, you need to do this now, and they say, thank you very much, let's go. That's wonderful. That's a great day at your work. Yeah, but that's not artful. That's someone who's already aligned with you. What about the person who's not? What about the person who does not have yet enough trust? And the person who's not inclined to take that action, and they say, let me think about it. What's happened there? They have the information, they know what you want them to do, but there's no motivation. You have not activated emotions. You need to do both. And most advisors are not aware of that. A lot of times you guys just want to be with the information. Let me give you the information. I'll just give you the information. You get to decide. They can't. Many people can't. They need you to think about messaging in such a way that allows them to understand what you're saying and activates the emotion so they can take the action they need to take to get the outcomes you're trying to help them with. That's advanced influence. So we have to work with this human being on its terms. Now, the problem for most human beings is there's a lot of stuff going on in their life. They have a complex life, and that complexity translates into some things that causes them to resist. In many cases, when their brain gets exhausted and they are unable to process the information, they're overwhelmed. In those cases, when they're working so hard to do that, it may be difficult for them to get all that information. So what I want to teach you today is how to organize information that helps them overcome their sense of inertia in that regard. And so the idea here is to work with human beings at their current point of need. And so the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to introduce to you several ideas, several clusters of ideas, bring them together, and that's going to lead me to a conversation model, a structural model to help you overcome this sort of thing. Let me go past this because this is no longer important for us. All right, so let's start here. What we know from the behavioral sciences, and this comes as much from classic neurology, classic psychology, as from behavioral economics, but I'll use some terms from behavioral economics for you. What we know from this material are the ways that the brain works, which leads us to understand what we need to do with that brain to accomplish our desired outcomes. So that's the reason we study this stuff, is to be able to look at a human being and say, oh, I see what's going on, and based on what's going on, I know what to do because I'm trying to take the client to a particular place. And again, that's everything you do all day long. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to develop some ideas that will first show you how to manage trust so that human being is more willing to delegate decisions to you, more receptive to your information. And second, how to organize proposals so the human being will tend to respond to those proposals with emotion. So now I've laid out my model so far. Are you still, you still with me? Are we clear? Thank you. So let's start here. In the English Webster's Dictionary, and I'm curious how this is going to go, but in the English Webster's Dictionary, the word client, which is what we use in financial services in the United States, has a very specific definition. And that definition, I think, is incredibly helpful when it comes to understanding how to build trust intentionally. So the definition on the screen there says, client is a person under the protection of another person. If you allow that to settle inside you and become a guiding principle, you will increase your influence unconsciously from the moment that becomes an organizing principle inside you. So let me enrich it a little bit. When I first came out of college, I went off, as I believe you may have seen in my bio, I went off and I took a graduate degree in theology. And that graduate degree in theology was intended to take me into becoming a pastoral minister. Now, in your culture, I think primarily you have priests, but you have some Protestant denominations in your culture as well, which are different than priests. And I was not a Catholic priest, I was a pastor or a clergyman, a minister in practice for the first 10 years of my career. Most of that time I was in a clinical setting, either as a hospital chaplain or as a pastoral psychotherapist, which is a role that people have in the United States. There are a few pastoral psychotherapists in Europe, but it's not a very common role. The reason I bring that up is as a minister, my people were under my protection. I had a very specific role, and I knew that was my role. And so I came to each interaction with the client in that role, or in this case, my parishioners in that role. Am I suggesting that your role is like that of a pastor? Yes. So after a time, I wanted to make more money, so I became a psychologist they get paid better. And as a psychologist, the client would come in and see me, and they would trust me to keep their confidence and trust me to use words to influence their decision making and their emotional well-being. And they were all under my protection. I had to keep their confidence. I had to be technically excellent in what I was doing, helping them achieve their outcomes. Am I suggesting that you should have the same kind of relationship toward your clients as a psychologist? Yeah, I am. Now, does that mean you should be a psychologist? Well, guess what? You already are, and you all know that. Tell me how many people who trust you deeply talk to you about the stuff of life they don't talk to anybody else about. You know why that happens? Because they trust you, and because they respect you, and because you're a character of significance in their life. And you're not supposed to be able to fix them. That's my job. Your job is to help them get where they're going financially. Your job is to help them author the second half of their life. I don't think there's anything more holy or sacred or healthy than that. But if we start with this idea that this person comes to me and they're under my protection, and I act as if that is true with each of these people, they feel it, and that's why they talk to you. Well, how about I show you how to do it intentionally? You can build and increase trust with any human being in exactly that way. Start with that assumption you need to do that. Make sure you stay in the realm of what you do, because the financial counselor and the marriage counselor and the psychological counselor and the spiritual counselor are all seeking to speak to the same needs in the human. Humans crave that. If you can step into that role, that is power for you. But we want to do this technically, okay? So technically, let's talk about trust, and let's talk about it from the perspective of how do you do it? Not showing up and being kind and hoping for the best, but actually intentionally doing it. So I have an equation I've written up here. I'm going to dig into this for a little bit, for a few minutes, and turn it into a tactic for you. And that equation, it goes like this. Trust, and by that I mean, and again, I'm going to say it slowly. Sorry, I'm going so fast. Trustworthiness. That when you are worthy of trust is a mechanism you can affect in others. So what I'm saying is, in any intentional relationship, so in a marriage, in parenting, in a business partnership, in a advisor to client, it's an intentional relationship. This isn't accidental. We're not just buddies. We're trying to accomplish something. In that relationship, trust is the fundamental connection. It's the fundamental enabler of what's happening. If your client does not trust you, you are dead in the water. If your client trusts you, you will eventually become a character of significance in the narrative of their life. If you build a business on the basis of knowing how to become a character of significance in the narrative of a human's life, maybe one of the 2 or 3 most important people, most highly regarded people they know, I think that makes you very referable. Actually, I know it because I teach people this all the time, and it's what it translates into. So we need to become trustworthy. How do we do it? It's very simple. The equation goes like this. Trustworthiness is caused in human relationships by you delivering a consistent set of experiences of goodwill and professional competency over time. So I'm going to pull that apart because that's your strategy. If you get that right, I'll show you a couple of tricks of how to do that. That's how you build the character of significance, and everything else flows out of that. Because if you have their trust, they will follow your leadership, and they will bring others to you, because you will be a singular character in their life. Now, by the way, so far I have told you nothing you didn't already know. You all live this every day. What I'm hoping to do is put words on it for you, so you have a vocabulary, and you can think about it and follow these guiding principles. So let's look at my equation. Consistency. In your practice with every human, they must have the same experience of you every time they meet with you. But those experiences are of one of 2 qualities. It's a consistent experience of goodwill and a consistent experience of professional competency. And those are 2 different functions. The goodwill appeals to the emotions. The professional competency appeals to the thinking. Everybody see the connection. So I need to have the same experience of you here and the same experience of you here. And over time, trust will grow and grow and grow and grow and grow. Trust is a function of time. You have people in your life you've known your whole life. Every one of you has friends from a long time ago. You know them because they've been the same person the whole time. And if they've been utterly consistent and never betrayed your trust, you have absolute confidence in them. They've got your back. You have people in your life you've met recently. You've had a few experiences with them. You don't have the same level of trust with them. It's simply a function of how humans work. You have new clients. They cannot trust you until they've had enough experiences. Your older clients have had a lot of experiences. I want you to think about what I just said. You can tell in your practice right now, you could chart your practice across your practice by the amount of trust that's in each of those relationships, because it's simply a function of duration. And if you were able to, and you're not able to do this, but if you're able to look at the number of interactions you've had with them, you could actually measure how much trust is likely to be present. So if you have a client you've had for 1 year and you've seen them 3 times, you have this much trust. If you have a client for 1 year and you've seen them 15 times, you'll have more. It's a function of time and experiences. And one of the great challenges in our business is you're busy. You have big businesses and a lot of humans. And a lot of those humans see you as a character of significance. Well, one of the things you might want to pay attention to is if you're allocating time and you have clients who are newer in the process, to be cognizant that they need more experiences so the trust goes deeper. What you'll do is invest in experiences, delivering experiences, and that will pay off with a higher level of trust. You'll have a more engaged client with whom you can do more. So in the United States, I'm very frequently talking to my clients, financial advisors, and saying, do you have too many clients to give them the experiences that allow them to have the kind of trust that allows them to go from this to this? Because they don't know what they need, and they're going to be missing things. And your job is to help them expand what they're doing. But if they don't have enough trust, it's harder for them. They're skeptical. So you see, right out of the box here, I'm giving you some guidance. What do we want to invest in? We want to invest in having as many experiences as possible over time so that trust can build. But those experiences are of 2 types: goodwill and professional competency. So let's dig a little deeper into that. If you will approach every client, now I've gone from a general observation, I'm going to go down 1 step specific. This is tactics. These are tactics. This is how to do this. If you will think about, let's say, goodwill as a starting point. How do I do goodwill? Well, I mean, you all have, however that was translated, you have a sense of it, right? How do I know when somebody has goodwill toward me? I'll tell you one secret. This is just an observation cross-culturally. The people that you experience having goodwill toward you, who are invested in you, you know what they do? They know what's going on with you even when you're not in front of them. So if you knew me, as many people in the United States work with me all the time. I travel with a lot of my wholesalers over there a lot of times. So many people have had multiple experiences with me. If you knew me and you were in the United States, recently we had a hurricane come up through the United States on the East Coast. It created a lot of damage. It went right over my house. Love that. I had 15 people who saw that on the news and called me up and said, hey, are you okay? That's goodwill. I was not in front of them. I was across the country. But they thought of me and they called me and said, hey, are you okay? That's goodwill. I just gave you magic with clients. Magic. Oh, you just came back from holiday. First time you ever went to Greece. Before you left, we talked about you standing in the Parthenon and what that would feel like. And they come back 2 weeks later, you call them up and say, hey, you're back from holiday. How was the Parthenon? Bam. Bam! How many people do that for you? I want you to think about how many people do that for you personally. There's a handful, 3 or 4. They're really important to you, aren't they? You can do that intentionally. Goodwill. Now, if you take this on and imagine that the human being's asking questions in the back of their head, not overtly. I'll talk about that in a second. They're asking these questions in the back of the head. If you assume when you're sitting in front of any human being, and especially early in the relationship or a brand new relationship, assume in the back of their head they're asking these 2 questions. Do I matter to you? Well, if you're sitting down and really trying to understand what's going on in their life, if you're trying to figure out the 4 things every advisor needs to know about a client, and you're working hard at it, that's evidence that they matter. Wow, he's really trying to understand me. And then if you demonstrate that you get them, that not only did you get the information, but you really understand what they're trying to accomplish and how unique they are, and they see that you get them, now they have a sense of goodwill and trust is growing. What are the 4 things every advisor needs to know? I know somebody wanted me to say that, right? 4 things the advisor needs to know. What is the client trying to accomplish? What do they want? Second thing, what are they afraid of? Third thing, what are they missing? That's the one thing that most advisors are not aware they need to be looking at. What are they missing? And having those 3 things in place, what is the best way to get them there? And if they understand that's what you're doing and what you come up with as a proposal is the best way to get them from here to there through what they're afraid of and ensure that nothing's missing, it's magical. All right, so that's goodwill. Now, just as an aside really quickly, and then move on. If ever a client asks you one of those questions, and they literally say, do I matter to you? It's not going well. So these are questions that are in the back of their head that you just assume are there, and you answer them. Because if they ever ask them of you, that's terrible. Now, there are 5 competency questions. Now, why more competency questions than goodwill questions? Because this is a professional engagement. They are paying you a fee. So your competency is utterly, critically important. In the United States, there's some research. Make sure I'm not stepping on my time too badly here. In the United States, there's some research. I have 20 minutes left on my time? 20? 25? All right, just tell you what, do this when I'm done, okay? Thank you. Because I do not want to, like, the worst thing a speaker can do is stand between 50 people and the cocktails. I learned that like 20 years ago. That's why I'm still standing, okay? So anyway. And professional competency is obviously critical. If you are someone who has goodwill toward the client, they'll like you. But if you demonstrate you're not competent, they will not work with you. They will ask you to parties, but they will never do business with you. So we want to do both. In the United States, there is a researcher who researches marriages. And he's quite famous and has developed the ability that he can look at a video of a couple interacting. And in 10 minutes, if he can have 10 minutes of video of them interacting, he can tell you with a 95% certainty whether or not they'll stay married or get divorced. And I've looked at his research, because this is part of, well, I use research from a lot of those things. That's an intentional relationship, a marital relationship, right? What he's looking at is whether or not one or the other or both of the people in the marriage think the other person is fundamentally competent. And if they decide they're incompetent as a human being, they will have contempt for them and they will not stay married. And his research is, like breathtakingly accurate. So the idea of competency is one of the fundamental bonding agents of any intentional relationship. We'll take it a little closer to home now. You all grew up, right? You're all grown-ups now. But once upon a time you were kids, right? And once upon a time you were in high school. Well, you would call it, I guess, your secondary school. The school before you go to university, whatever you call that here. Right? In my world, we call it high school. You all had a circle of friends. Now I want you to remember back. Let's go back. This is the hypnosis part. Right? Let's go back in time. In your circle of friends, one or two of them were people that over time you realized were incompetent humans. Yeah, you had several, huh? Okay, I get it. By the way, if you look back and remember there was all these friends and none of them seemed incompetent, you might have been the, well, no, I'm teasing. Teasing. Thank you for getting that. It did translate good. No, but you remember, those folks were not people you could take seriously. Those folks were not people you could trust. Those folks were people you probably did not maintain relationship with. Humans are very sensitive to that. You can't stay married with someone if you conclude they're incompetent, you become contemptuous of. You can't maintain a business partnership, and your clients won't maintain that with you. So you have to imagine always that the client is asking these questions of you. If the building of trust is mediated through experiences, then every interaction with the client is an opportunity either to build that trust or to degrade that trust. And if you build that trust, or to build that trust, if you think about these questions as being in the back of their mind, and you answer them intentionally, proactively, you don't enter into any conversation with a client cavalierly. Can you do that word? Yeah, you probably, that's probably more Spanish than English, actually, if I think of it. So if you do that without thoughtfulness, you're wasting an opportunity. But now, if you see these questions and the client is a newer client and you start delivering information to them in that regard, that's power. That's power of influence, because what are you doing? You know what you're doing is you're advancing trust. You're building trust, another step. Now, some human beings may require you to build a significant amount of trust before they can release and delegate their decisions to you. Every human is different in that way. That's what we call a decision threshold in psychology. That a human being, like all of you have a different way of buying a car. When you buy a car, when I buy a car, I literally go out and say, oh, I like that one, and I drive it off the lot. So I don't need a lot of experiences of the car. Some of you in this room, you research it, and you go look at it, and then you go look at it again, and you go look at it again. Everybody's unique in that regard. It's not bad or worse. So I got to tell you, sometimes I buy bad cars because I don't think about it enough. But my point is, it may take more or less time, more or less experiences, but the one thing I can tell you is build up those experiences and you are doing something really powerful in your process. Now, let me tell you the most important question of all of those there. And this question is so neglected, and it's probably the biggest opportunity you have to market your services, and that's number 6. If you built your practice around answering the other 4 questions of that group from time to time, but you knew that the most important question to answer is the one that says, if I continue to work with you, pay you this fee as I am, is it likely that the future I want is the future I'm going to get? And if that question is the fundamental question you seek to answer all the time, everything grows out of it better. To answer the question, you have to know what they want. And by the way, what they want evolves over time, so you have to keep track of that. How many humans are in your life that know what you want? More importantly, how many humans in your life know what you want and are professionally skilled to help you get it and are personally committed to helping you make that happen? How many people do you have like that in your life? Maybe 1 or 2? They're pretty darn significant in your life. So you see what I'm wrapping in here? See what I'm doing here? This is just built into humans. What if you could answer that question constantly? The likelihood that the future I want is the future I'm going to get. What if you knew to call me when markets got a little choppy and said, you know what? I just ran the numbers again. And it's great. It's going to be fine. The market choppiness doesn't affect that outcome at all. And they know what you're doing, and they know that you're going to do it. And of course, the other piece is that we can help you with that. That's part of what the afternoon is about, is to give you another incremental step to be able to answer the other questions. Do you know what's going on? Do you know what to do about it? Can you explain it to me so I can understand it? Man, you put those two things together, the goodwill of really getting them, and then the ability to feed them with that information in the dosage that's right. Because as you get to know them, you know how much information they want, how much they don't want. Man, it's powerful. Okay, so right now what we have is trust. What I've taught you. I know this is scary. It's going to get scarier in just a minute. No, actually, I don't know. I don't think if this is a PDF, it won't get any scarier. That's as scary as it's going to get. Right? But you all see the snake, right? All right, that's important. We'll get to the snake in just a minute. I want to tell you a story about a grizzly bear and a snake, so it's going to be really scary. So right now, by the way, if any of you are professional speakers or you have an opportunity to speak very often, you see what I did? I did just right now. I kind of slowed down. I kind of stopped moving forward. Right, that's so, first of all, so my poor translator can take a breath, but also to rest you for a minute, because we just went through some stuff and I wanted to settle in a little bit. But now I'm ready to go, so let's go and do the next thing. I was told that you were a very bright audience, and I just love working with people who get it, and I can see the wheels are turning. And for me, you can imagine doing what I do to work with a group of people where the wheels are turning. I love this. So I'm just going to go the rest of the afternoon. You can take the rest of the afternoon off. You know, I'm teasing. I was speaking to you. Anyway. So we talked about trust. How do you do trust? Trust is the consistent experience of goodwill and professional competency delivered over time. You now know how to do it. I gave you some examples of how to do it. You started to think of some examples of how to do it. You started to think of some of your clients. You started to think of some of the clients you need to build more trust with. Bam, you're now going to go to the next level. And you can do it quickly and easily with natural skills, because this is just built into the human being. Let me tell you what else is built into the human being, because this plays absolutely into the issue of urgency. So we now can build trust so the person can receive the information. They're open to your messaging. But we have to talk now about urgency. How do we cause urgency to take action in human beings? Remember, that's mediated by a different part of the brain. So we got to get natural here. We have to understand something about the human brain. If you're familiar with behavioral economics, you'll be familiar with the term narrow framing. This is one of the fundamental heuristics that were researched by Daniel Kahneman and have been advanced by Dan Ariely and some of the other Richard Thaler, who won the Nobel Prize. So the world of behavioral economics is getting a lot of attention because it's correcting decades of bad thinking about how humans make decisions. You know, when I went to school in my first degree, and the reason it's on my bio is that I have a degree in business administration. I had economics and accounting and all the stuff that you spend all your days with. So I'm not just a soft skills guy. I'm as confused about economics as you are. But back when I was doing school, the whole theory was that humans were rational decision makers. Well, we all know that. By the way, anyone who's gotten married understands that humans are not, in fact, rational decision makers. I mean, what more irrational decision did you make than that one, right? Anyway, that didn't work. I'll move on. Says a guy who's been divorced twice, but anyway. So we know a lot about how humans make decisions, and we know that humans do not do a good job with making rational decisions. This slow-thinking brain gets tired easily, gets overwhelmed easily. In fact, it gets overwhelmed in a very particular way that you need to understand, because you'll see it every day, and you have to know what to do about it. So this idea of a heuristic, the term I just used, and it probably translates almost the same word, a heuristic is just a built-in mechanism in the brain that activates in certain circumstances. It's triggered in certain circumstances, and it functions as a shortcut. So when I talked about walking along and seeing a snake in the ground, right? So I'm walking along and see a snake. I'm going to have this reaction. Well, I'll tell you the story. So I have a house in northern Pennsylvania, in a place in the mountains where there are not a lot of people. And this house has been in my family My grandson will be the 6th generation to use the house in the summertime. So it's been a long time in our family. Last summer I was on a walk in the forest, and I came down a path, and curled up on the path was this. That's a timber rattlesnake. Now, you don't have them in this part of the world, but a timber rattlesnake is a poisonous snake. They get about this long, and they get about this big around, and it's a very scary thing to see a snake that big, that has fangs, that's curled up, and when you walk up to it, its tail goes like that. It is an incredibly visceral feeling that you have. You're all having it right now, right? So I'm standing there looking at the snake, who kindly told me I'm here. Now, in that moment, what happened in my brain? The only piece of information that mattered was this. Of all the information in the context, that's narrow framing. It's a survival instinct. It happens automatically. So my wife Renee and I used to have a house in Florida, and we had this hedge along the side of the house, a ficus hedge. And in order to keep the ficus hedge pretty, we had to prune it. And so the first year we moved in, this was the last time this ever happened. First and last time this ever happened. The ficus hedge started getting shaggy, so I went out to start to prune it. I asked Renee to come out and prune it with me, so we're in there pruning the ficus hedge. And she reaches in and grabs a branch to pull it out to prune it, except she got herself a handful of black snake, which is not a poisonous snake. But he was very unhappy about being gripped by Renee. And so Renee grabs the snake, his head comes around and gets in her face. Y'all have that feeling in your hand right now? It's kind of, ooh, kind of visceral, right? Okay. So the next thing that happens, I'm down the road here, Renee starts screaming, and lets go of the snake, and then she's standing there, right? So I run up to her and do what you're supposed to do when somebody's doing that. I run up to her and go, honey, calm down, calm down. Gentlemen, see what I'm doing here? Never do that. Because they want to, when you do that, they want to kill you. But what has happened is a physiological reaction. She couldn't help it. It took her forever to calm down, and she never trimmed the hedge again. I don't mind snakes, so it was fine with me, but that's a heuristic, automatic mechanism. So when you are faced with a threat, that kicks in, narrow framing kicks in. What's it designed to do? Focus on the threat, right? All other information at that moment is irrelevant. 3 years ago, I was in the Grand Teton National Park out on the border of Idaho and Wyoming in the United States. It's a very rugged area, and I was on a hike. Believe it or not, that day, my companion and I, not Renee, were, just so you know, right, we're on a hike, and we were going to Death Canyon. Swear to goodness, that's where we were headed. That was our destination, Death Canyon. And we got halfway to Death Canyon. We're up on the side of the mountain. We came out of the woods into a clearing, and there was a full-grown male grizzly bear 75 yards in the middle of the field. And we stand on the side of the clearing, and he's sitting in the middle of the clearing. He clearly sees us. Guess what my brain did? Holy moly, that's a bear, and that's all I could see. That's narrow framing. This is all making sense, right? Now, we started on the side of the path went up the side of the clearing, and he was not activated by us, thank you, right? And I had given the can of bear spray to my companion I was hiking with. Now, why did I do that? Wouldn't you want to have control of the bear spray? No, this is just advice to everybody in the room. If you're ever doing that, you never carry the bear spray. Why? Because she had to stop with the bear spray. That gave me another 20 yards easy on the bear. That's supposed to be a joke, but that one also didn't work. Yes, bear spray and grizzly bears, not a real big thing here in this part of the world. All right. You don't have to outrun the bear, you just have to outrun your partner. That's the old joke. All right. Anyway. Besides, if I had carried the bear spray and I had to use it, I probably would have sprayed myself in the face. All right, that's narrow framing. So as we go up the hike on the side of the mountain, the bear decides to walk like with us, just walk like parallel with us. Now, do you think we had any conversation while that was happening? No. Do you think we were noticing the birds in the sky? No. What were we noticing? Bear, 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 bear. And then he went into Whitebrush and we never saw him again. We never, for the rest of the hike, we did not know where the bear was. Do you think we remember anything about that hike other than the bear? No. That's narrow framing. There is nothing you can do about it to control it. Now, why is this important to you? You're not likely to be working with bears on a daily basis in your practice. However, the other time the human brain narrow frames is in the presence of complexity of any type. So we'll use as an example for your purposes the airline pilot. Let's see if we can move this forward. Oh, there's my snake. Oh, no, I've highlighted the snake. There you go. See, now we're narrow framing on my snake. Forgot that did that. This is the pilot's view. So when I get on the airplane on Saturday to fly home, there'll be two pilots in the front of the airplane. Senior pilot on the left, co-pilot on the right. When the senior pilot gets on that aircraft, he has been in a cockpit identical to that cockpit 100, maybe 1,000 times. Has had hundreds and hundreds, maybe thousands of hours of training in that exact cockpit. The cockpit of every aircraft that a pilot flies commercially is exactly the same. Why? Because you don't want any variance when things go badly. You want to be very familiar with the cockpit. Even though he's totally familiar with the cockpit, or she is totally familiar with the cockpit, when they sit down, they automatically narrow frame to a 17-degree arc of information immediately in front of them where the controls for flying the airplane are located by the engineers. They narrow frame not because that's where the controls are, they narrow frame because there's so much complexity they have to. They can't, this brain has a limit, can only process so much information. And so they narrow frame. Now, what happens in the engineering of the aircraft is they put controls everywhere else in the cockpit, have alarms on them. If something goes wrong, like engine 4 is overheating, when that's happening, what happens is a little light comes on and blinks, and a sound goes off, an alarm, beep, beep, beep. Why? Because the pilot has no choice, has no ability, it's built in, cannot expand their frame to see everything, has to just take their narrow frame and go like this. Up, narrow frame up there. Here, here. It's digital. There's no ability to expand. And what will happen then is the pilot will narrow frame on the problem. And what they learned through research and getting a whole bunch of black boxes out of broken airplanes that crashed in the mountains is that for years and years what was happening in aircraft was that both pilot and co-pilot would narrow frame on the problem and they would allow the plane to fly into the ground. It happened once in the Everglades in Florida, not far from where I used to live. There's no topography in the Everglades. It's perfectly flat and mostly wet. And they let a plane fly right into the ground because two pilots were looking at a problem and they forgot to fly the airplane. Now, why do I tell you that story? Not to make you afraid of flying, because they don't do that anymore. That's not how it works anymore. I tell you that story so that every one of you has a visceral experience of, oh my goodness, how could a pilot let that happen? They didn't let it happen. Their brain couldn't do both. Your brain can't do both. Your client's brain can't do both. So in airplanes now, what happens has been since the 70s, what happens in the airplane is when there's an event in the aircraft, an alarm goes off, the senior pilot's job, as soon as he can possibly do it, or she can possibly do it, is to decide who flies and who solves. And once they decide that, they don't talk to each other anymore at all. Nobody asks a question, nobody interrupts, they both know we must now do one thing, and we must be very viscerally aware of that, because we're in danger now that we could get distracted and our brain can only handle this much. It's built in, it's instinctive, you can't control it, it just happens. And every pilot is trained to be extremely concerned about it, because bad things happen when that occurs. Let me point something out to everyone in this room. When you're working with a wealthy client, do you think the complexity of their personal financial life might be as complex as the aircraft cockpit or more so? Yeah, you guys use some pretty pretty sophisticated solutions for pretty wealthy people who are dealing with a lot of different risks and a lot of different investment opportunities. It's really complicated. Do you think your client has a good handle on that complexity? I can tell you they don't. Why? Because they're ignorant? No. Some of these people are financial wizards. But there's only so much they can process. The pilot knows everything about that airplane. He can do it one at a time. In your client's personal financial life, there are no alarms. You don't find out you got a problem until you hit the ground. That's why they need a co-pilot. And they need to understand they need a co-pilot. Not because they're not good and smart, because they're all smart, or they wouldn't have done what they did. But they need a co-pilot because it's too complicated. Look, it's not just their personal financial life. It's also they have a marriage, and they have kids, and they have friends, and they have nutrition, and they have health, and they work out, and they have a house. They can't see it all. And unless they're a professional like you, they can't know it all. Where would they get the knowledge? This is the biggest news I could possibly give you because it's built in. Let me ask you this question. Most of the other financial advisors you compete with, you know what I'm talking about, your competition, most of them are human also. It's subtle. Most of them are human also. That means they narrow frame. If you've got 200 clients, and you're managing all those relationships, and you're trying to grow your business, what's the likelihood that you're paying attention to all the things the clients should need holistically in their life? Or what's the likelihood, if you don't know about this narrow framing thing, that you're managing them off the top of your head or based on what they say to you? What I just put my finger on is the biggest opportunity, and any firm who ever figures out how to go after it is going to absolutely revolutionize and maximize their productivity. Why? Because if every other advisor out there is narrow framing the client's situation, and every client out there, by definition, is narrow framing what they're paying attention to, that means every client out there is missing something. Now, why does that matter? I have 5 minutes to tell you why that matters. Because if you tell someone who has taken the time, effort, and energy to hire an advisor to make sure that there's nothing missing that can hurt them, nothing missing that they should be taking advantage of, that they're intentionally paying you to create that desired outcome and make sure they're doing it the best way possible to get there. What are the 4 things the advisor needs to know? What do they want? What are they afraid of? What's missing? Which allows you then to determine, if you know those 3 things, what's the best way for them to get there. And if they understand that's what you're doing, first of all, again, character of great significance and fascinated with what you have to say. And if they trust you and there's goodwill, bam, you can now take them out to here. And the way you're going to do that is in the way you use information in your conversation, because it's adding that piece of new information that causes them to go, what? I'm missing what? What does that activate? Emotions. I'm missing what? What are the consequences of that? How long have I been missing it? And they conclude that, and they look at their advisor and they say, what? What's going on here? I'm going to show you a quick strategy here around the corner. I'm going to go through a couple of slides real quick to get there. Come on. These are not useful to you guys. I've made the point already. We'll go to this point here and get started. Okay. Like my little girlfriend there. So I'm going to tell you the most important story I will tell you today. So remember I was on that hike with the bear? My companion was a woman who had the bear spray. And the woman that was my companion was, at the time, was the CEO of a biotech startup in the United States. Their product was a blood test for colorectal cancer. Revolutionary product. She was the CEO. She's a Harvard MBA grad. That word probably means something to you. She was a chemical engineer by training. So what do we got here? We got a really detail-oriented person who's really well educated, who's trying to fund a biotech startup, so financially savvy as all get out. So when we came back from that trip, she got a call from a friend and said, hey, I'm going to a seminar in another town, sponsored by a woman financial advisor who's putting together a group of women executives, and they're bringing in this speaker who happened to teach at Harvard that my friend Elizabeth knew. Oh, I want to go to that. Well, the woman who was the advisor was not her advisor. She worked with an advisor at another company. And for the sake of argument, his name was Leroy. She'd worked with Leroy for 20 years. He'd helped her through a lot of different things with investments. And he was a very good guy. I happen to know him because of what I do. Now, Elizabeth and I had only recently started dating at this point. So she goes to the seminar, and the woman who's leading the seminar says, welcome to the seminar. I want you all to have a good time. I want you all to get to know each other. Great networking event. I want the speaker to come in. I'm going to just take 2 minutes and introduce myself. And the way I'm going to introduce myself is this way. I'm going to tell you that there's 50 women in this room, and I know from 20 years of experience that 40 of the 50 are missing at least one of the 4 critical documents that every client has to have in place in order for their financial plan to be effective. And then she listed the 4 documents. They may or may not be relevant here, but I won't list them because this is a different culture. But the 4 documents. And Elizabeth said, what? I don't have any of those 4 documents. And so the next day she calls the advisor, which was the advisor's plan, and says, hey, tell me about these documents, and showed she did, and helped her find someone to get the documents prepared. So she got it all done within 2 weeks, and then she called me. We had just started dating. She said, I know what you do. I have a problem. I'd like you to help me. What's the problem? I said, well, Leroy, blah, 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 never brought these documents up. We never talked about them. It's not like he said I needed them and I didn't do it. He just never brought it up. Then she said this, and now I don't know what else I could be missing. I think I need to change advisors. I just gave you a business plan. So how do you do that? Briefly, this way. It's a 5-step model. First step, when you're interacting with a human being in the early stages of the relationship, or by the way, anytime in the relationship, you start with this. Hey, I know what you're trying to accomplish and I know what you're afraid of. This is what I heard. Think about doing this in the first meeting with a client or in the early stages of a client. Listen, 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 synthesize, 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 and then feed back to them, Ken, this is what I've heard so far from you. This is what you want. These are the things you want. This is when you want them. This is why you want them. I really get you, and this is what you're afraid of, the concerns you have that might interrupt getting what you're after. This is what I heard. And Ken goes, wow, you get me. You really paid attention. A lot of goodwill here, and you're really smart. You understood it. Trust is building. First meeting, second meeting. And that's trust. Now urgency. Step 2. This is what you should also be concerned about. As I understand people in your situation, and I understand you don't say this, I understand you're working with an advisor who's narrow framing. You are narrow framing. So as I listen to this case you've just made to me, I'm using my professional knowledge. There are things missing based on what you've told me, what I've heard you say you're doing, what I heard you say you're afraid of. There are things missing that you should be doing. There's lots of things missing. And that's almost always going to be the case. That's magic. So, third step. So this is what you actually need. So you have a client you've worked with for 10 years, 15 years. You started when they're 35, they're now 50. You sit down with them after their 50th birthday and say, Ken, we've been working together for this long. This is what we've done. This is what you've been trying to accomplish. This is how we've accomplished it. But you just turned 50. You're now in a new situation in life. Things have gotten more complicated, and the decisions you make from this point onward through the rest of your life will have a level of complexity and implication that you've never had before. Time is no longer your friend. So now we need to do this, 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 and this to make sure that nothing's missing that can hurt you, nothing's missing that you should be taking advantage of. This is what you now need. And we want to do that in the context of so that you can have those things you want. You need these things to have those things. You connect them together. And so this is what I'm recommending. Fourth step. And then the last step, if I can get the slide to do this, and I'm wrapping up, I'm ending in 2 minutes. So this is what we should do now. Every meeting should end with that. This is what we should do now. This is what I heard. This is what you should also be concerned about. Why those two things? Trust, urgency. So this is what you actually need so you can accomplish those things that matter. So here's what I'm recommending we do, and here's the action we need to take today. Takes everything I just told you and puts it into a conversation model that every one of you in this room can do this afternoon if you needed to do it with a client. All right. I probably stepped on my time by 1 minute. Before we go to lunch, and I know you all want to go because I made promises earlier, is there any question or issue that you want me to address? And the translator will translate it if you want to have that conversation with me. Is there, but if there's not, I mean, we'll just move on, but I'm happy to entertain questions. Go ahead, we've got a microphone. Here we go.
Buenos días. Muchas gracias por la conferencia, me ha parecido muy interesante. Hay una pregunta que te quería hacer con respecto a los clientes nuevos.
It's on. It's on too. Oh, really? I can't just hold it up. Okay, you hold that for me. All right, now I look silly. Go ahead. Can I hear you?
Enhorabuena. Quería hacerte una pregunta con respecto a los clientes nuevos que todavía no tenemos esa confianza. Muchas veces se realiza escucha activa sobre cuáles son sus inquietudes en este proceso inicial de conocimiento de la persona. ¿Crees que es más importante en ese primer momento crear esa relación de confianza o poner de forma prioritaria la parte más profesional? Más de conocimiento.
Go ahead. Oh, wait a second. Hold on. I have to get... Now try. So the question was, early in the relationship, trust isn't there yet. So do we focus on the professional competency because the trust isn't there yet? I would say I would reverse those ideas. Until trust is there, to some extent, it will be very difficult for you to get the information you need to be able to demonstrate professional competency in the context of that client's life. If you try to this is a big mistake that a lot of advisors make. If you try to demonstrate professional competency to someone who doesn't trust you and has not given you any information, then you're just guessing at what they would need to hear about you. And what you're trying to do is you're trying to establish credibility. Because you're concerned, all advisors are concerned in that first meeting, I have to demonstrate I'm credible. Depending on how you got the client, you don't have to do that. It's a mistake. Now, let me explain why. If the client has come to see you because of a referral, somebody has told them, oh, she's amazing. They already have given you some credibility. They wouldn't be in the room, right? If the client is coming to see you, there's always a precipitating event that's made it happen. Either they were told, but something has complexified their life and that's why they're there, or some big event has happened. Grandma died, I was fired, won the lottery, whatever it may be. If they're talking to you, they think you're credible, or they wouldn't be talking to you. So for me, now again, remember I'm a psychologist, so I have a bias. For me, the first thing I want to do is to say, okay, tell me what happened, why are you here? Oh, you inherited some money, wonderful, and hopefully this was not a loss that was painful to you, but however you do that, and I'm sure you have your own style. Tell me a little bit about your situation to help me understand what you're trying to accomplish and begin to express curiosity, authentic curiosity, about what they're trying to accomplish. It is when you can do that, when you say to them, all right, I think I hear it's rudimentary in the first meeting, right? But I hear this and this and this and this, and they go, yes, you got it. What have you accomplished? Trust and professional competency, both are building. And now you can say, well, I hear that you're looking for this from me. There's a couple of other things that I think we should also talk about that are also concerning in your situation. We may have to talk more about that as time goes on, but right now I just want to put that on the table. So what I think you are actually needing is this and this. And let me explain how we would do that. If the client is saying, yeah, I see that, it makes sense to me, you can now move into explaining some of the technicalities of what you want to do for them. However, what I would want you to do is kind of balance it back and forth like this. We'll build some trust, and we'll give them some of our information. We'll build some more trust, we'll give them some information, and we'll get to that proposal at some point where you've had some experiences continuously demonstrating the goodwill. Of the two things that drives that boat, it's not your credibility, it's the goodwill, it's the interaction in that regard, it's the building of trust in that regard. But that's really hard for advisors, because what advisors typically want to do is they want to throw a lot of stuff at the client saying, look, I'm credible, I'm credible, I'm credible, I'm credible, I'm credible, because you're anxious about what they're thinking of you. And I will tell you, if you're listening carefully and really trying to understand and really working at that, as I know you know how to do, their experience is, ooh, this is different and this is interesting. And by the way, from the research I've done in ultra high net worth clients, it's the one thing that's most often missing. That the advisor is so anxious without being aware of it going in, that with the ultra high net worth client, like $50 million or $100 million of net worth, that they come in and they say, well, let me tell you all the things we're going to do. If the advisor will step back and say, look, we can do anything you want and need. I work for this amazing platform. The most important thing in this room is for me to understand what it is you're trying to accomplish and what this money means to you. The client's like, oh, finally somebody who really wants to understand me before they try to pitch me. That work? Okay. And go ahead.
Hi, Ken. Una pregunta, me viene a la cabeza la gente joven, las nuevas generaciones, como alguna recomendación, algo diferente, un tip para acercarnos a esas nuevas generaciones muy digitalizadas, que buscan solos, que no les apetece compartir. ¿Cómo generamos ese trust?
So the question is, the younger client who is isolated and kind of digitally insulated, and how do we build trust with them? I think you have to do something first before you can build the trust as a mechanism. So I'll give you an example of what I've recommended. And this, by the way, this works for the younger client, but it also works for the younger advisor. Because the younger advisor also, differently from the old guard, where we just kind of lost all social inhibition 20 years ago, and we just go out and have conversations with people, right? A lot of people in this room are naturally gregarious conversationalists. In a world where we all grew up squeezing ourselves through this thing, like we went to college, and instead of talking to people, when we went to dinner at college, we were doing this, right? And bumping into people down the hallway. So we're all kind of, in that generation, they're not as comfortable with bumping into each other verbally, that they're more isolated. What I've recommended is you try to start relationships with an instrument that the other person can engage that's risk-free. I'll explain what I mean by that. An instrument that's risk-free, that can start a conversation with the urgency already engaged and with the credibility already engaged. And that because the urgency is engaged and the credibility is engaged, it drives the person into the conversation. The instrument I'm thinking of, let's do this. I'll pick one of the instruments I've built, but these are things you guys can build, and I'm happy to help you build them if they're of use to you. So I built an instrument called the New Child Checklist. And so my daughter Sarah just had her first child, my first grandson. Rowan's 1. Sarah's got a complicated life. And so if my financial advisor came to me and say, hey, Ken, I know Sarah just had her first child. This is a complicated time. She's probably thinking differently about her financial life, probably seeing it as in a bigger light. I put together some thoughts on the strategies that people in her situation should be using. There's 22 things that we think they should be doing at this stage of life to create a more secure platform for herself and her grandson, your grandson. We make this available to young couples for consideration. So why don't, if you'd like, pass it on down to Sarah and let her know I do a 1-hour conversation about what's on that checklist and answer questions about it. What does that do? Okay, thing one it does is causes Sarah to go, oh, I'm interested in that. My daughter, again, some of you younger people will relate to this. Rowan was born, Sarah had 3 websites that tell her exactly what he should be doing every day. It's like, today, Rowan should be babbling. And the other day she called me, she's not babbling right. So, okay, so she has all that stuff, right? So she wants to know. Checklist. Now you know. Now she looks at what she's doing with her current advisor. What happens? That advisor's been narrow framing. So now she's got 22 things and 9 of them aren't done. What happens to her regard for the other advisor? Goes away. You can't regard the other advisor anymore. So now you have information, and now you see there's things missing. You see your advisor has missed the boat, and the advisor that has prepared this is offering to do a free conversation, no risk, no cost. And now we can have a conversation in which I can explain what's going on and now start to find out what's going on with Sarah. And now we've broken through that barrier that keeps us apart because we're young and digitally isolated from each other. And I'm actually engaging her in the way she needs to be engaged with information. Now, where else can you do that? I have 11 checklists. The pre-divorce checklist, the midlife financial preparedness checklist, the early accumulator checklist, the death of spouse checklist. That's a downer, but it happens. The elder care checklist, the pre-retirement checklist, you see how it works. I have this information, you might find this helpful. It's an absolutely risk-free offer. And I do these calls, if you like, I take 45 minutes, walk you through, make sure you know exactly what's going on. Give that to 10 of your retiring clients who have a bunch of other friends who are within 5 or 10 years of retirement. Those friends will be like, what? Hey, I miss it. Remember what Elizabeth said? Now I don't know what else I could be missing. I think I got to get a new advisor. Oh, the advisor that built this checklist seems like a brilliant person. Maybe I should go. That makes sense? All right, that's a long answer. And the food's waiting. Anything else? You guys were phenomenal audience. I enjoyed you so much. Thank you so much for your time.